Marilyn Monroe was trapped on a movie set that was secretly a stage for her own downfall when a director demanded she surrender her dignity for a camera. He thought she was merely a commodity to be broken for a $1,000 bet, but his cruel demand unleashed the quiet, ferocious strength of the woman Hollywood thought it had already mastered. The sun beat down on the fictional set of Desert Blossom. It was the hottest day in Burbank history, but the soundstage was frigid, chilling the tension that always seemed to follow Marilyn Monroe like an unseen audience. She had poured every ounce of her fiercely intelligent mind into the character, determined to shed the bubbly facade and show the world the depths she carried inside. Yet, every morning she woke up, she felt the familiar anxiety, the feeling of being constantly watched, constantly judged, waiting for the golden cage to snap shut around her. This day, a Tuesday, began like any other, but the energy on Stage 3 was wrong, a palpable shift in the air that foreshadowed disaster. The director, Otto Lang, a man whose artistic vision was matched only by his ruthless, calculating ego, was pacing the floorboards with predatory intent. Lang had built his career on taking powerful people and carefully taking them down a peg, calling it unearthing the truth of performance. As Marilyn slipped into a simple ivory silk dress for the upcoming scene, a quiet moment of reflection, Lang abruptly stopped the rehearsal. He walked past the crew and stood directly in front of Marilyn, his body casting a deliberate shadow over her face that seemed to steal the light from her eyes. "Marilyn," he said, low enough to be intimate, yet loud enough to silence the 100 people on set. "We need to talk about the scene where your character, Eliza, collapses." He tapped the script with an aggressive rhythm. "The wardrobe department prepared a beautiful robe, of course, but I've had an artistic breakthrough. The moment Eliza falls apart must be utterly primal, utterly defenseless. A robe is a barrier. It's a lie, a comfortable, theatrical lie." Marilyn felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. She knew this was the moment of ultimate testing, a fight she had promised herself she would never lose, a boundary she could not allow to be breached. "Otto, the script is clear," Marilyn said, her voice remaining level despite the tremor she felt inside her hands. "Eliza is devastated, yes, but she is alone. She is collapsing in emotional pain. She doesn't need to be unclothed to communicate despair." Lang laughed, a cold, short sound that made the surrounding crew members wince. "You misunderstand, my dear. This is about the audience understanding raw vulnerability. The camera doesn't lie, and fabric, darling, fabric lies." He straightened up, addressing the entire set, his voice now a booming pronouncement that demanded obedience. "I've just spoken with Mr. Warner. I am invoking the artistic necessity. Clauses in your contract. When Eliza collapses in 5 minutes, she collapses as a woman stripped bare. No robe, no cover, no pretense." The oxygen seemed to leave the soundstage. Ed McMahon, standing just off camera as a fictional stand-in, looked away in shock. Marilyn stood frozen, the silk of her dress suddenly feeling heavy, suffocating. Lang had dropped a bombshell that was less about cinema and more about absolute control, publicly challenging the one rule she had fiercely guarded throughout her entire career. For a moment, her mind flashed back to the small, cold room in her youth where she first learned the painful cost of being seen without being valued. Lang didn't care about art, he cared about submission. Marilyn looked at the man who held her career in his hand, his eyes shining with triumph, his lips curled into that cruel smile. She knew that to comply was to sacrifice her soul to the gilded machine. To refuse was to court a disaster that could end her career in a blaze of scandalous headlines. The lights dimmed, and Otto Lang leaned in one last time, a serpent's whisper of challenge. 5 minutes, Marilyn. Choose. She walked slowly back to her dressing room, the door clicking shut behind her, the absolute silence now louder than any explosion. She picked up the phone, her hand shaking, knowing that the battle had just begun, and her only ally was the memory of a scared young woman who had made a fierce private vow long ago. The dressing room mirror reflected only the figure of Norma Jeane, stripped of the Marilyn facade, staring at the impossible choice. The chilling echo of Lang's demand was a direct challenge to the unbreakable vow she had made, making the potential loss of her dignity a far greater threat than the loss of her career. She wasn't seeing the bright lights of Burbank, but the chipped paint and harsh, unforgiving shadows of a tiny apartment 20 years earlier. A place where the world first taught her that visibility came with a painful, exploitative price. The telephone felt heavy in her hand. This fight wasn't for her agent. It was a private war waged against the ghosts of her past, against the powerful men who perpetually tried to define her worth by her exterior. She sank onto the vanity stool, her mind drifting back to her first photographs, taken by a man who saw her only as a product, not a person. The soothing promises vanished after the session, replaced by a cold transactional silence and a lingering, sick feeling of having given away a piece of herself she could not retrieve. That night, lying alone in the threadbare room, Norma Jeane wept with incandescent rage. She gripped the cheap brass locket her mother had given her, the cold metal digging into her palm, a physical anchor in the terrifying darkness, swearing she would never feel that powerless again. She realized then that the world was desperate to consume her, to strip her of her modesty and her mind. It was in that room that she made a powerful, silent, and unbreakable vow. I will give them the glamour, I will give them the performances, I will give them Marilyn, but Norma Jeane remains mine. The body is the tool, but the soul is the sanctuary. I will never allow anyone to force me across that threshold again. This vow was the only true insurance she had in Hollywood. That vow, whispered into a pillow and never spoken aloud, was the true, fiercely guarded foundation of Marilyn Monroe. It was why she was often late, why she could be difficult. She was fighting unseen battles, pushing back against the demands that threatened to undo the only self-respect she truly possessed. Every wardrobe debate was the quiet, ferocious defense of that vulnerable teenage girl who had promised herself she would survive. Now, Otto Lang was demanding she tear up that vow and offer her vulnerability as spectacle for the masses. The sheer terror of her youth was sharp and immediate, but now it was channeled, replaced by the fierce, unwavering resolve of the woman she had become. She took a deep, steadying breath, the kind that anchors the body when the heart is pounding a frantic rhythm. She would call upon the strength of Norma Jeane, who had always known the difference between being admired and being owned. She stood up, reaching for a silk scarf to tie around her head, a gesture of quiet dignity. The fear of failure, of losing everything, was still present, heavy and cold, but beneath it now pulsed a dangerous, electrifying refusal. She smoothed her dress, adjusting the folds of the ivory silk, a subtle, elegant statement of her intention. The director wanted her to be defenseless, but she would show him the power of being perfectly defended. She knew with chilling certainty that Otto Lang would keep pushing, believing he could break her spirit. The studio executive's office was a pristine, refrigerated box of power where the air felt thin and pressurized. Marilyn walked into this sanctuary of financial command the next morning with a deliberate, quiet certainty that unnerved the two men, Otto Lang simmering with smug confidence, and Mr. Warner, the studio head, whose mask of polite exhaustion was beginning to slip. They fully expected her to apologize, to weep, or to negotiate a meager compromise. She simply stood her ground, a pillar of ivory silk dignity in the center of the spacious, overly decorated room. "Marilyn, darling, you're creating quite a costly situation," Mr. Warner began, his voice dripping with condescending patience, as if addressing a willful child. He held the thick filming contract like a gavel. Lang, seated beside him, simply crossed his arms, his confidence a cold, visible armor. "I am ready to perform the scene as written," Marilyn stated clearly, her eyes meeting Mr. Warner's unflinchingly. "But I will not perform any version of the scene that requires me to be unclothed. It is exploitative, not artistic, and it violates my personal trust." Warner sighed heavily, drumming his fingers on the mahogany desk. "But Marilyn, the contract, Section 6, Subsection 4, it's quite explicit. It gives the director artistic necessity." "The papers are already suggesting you are becoming difficult, my dear," Lang interjected with a cold, smooth voice designed to wound her professional pride. "It's about commitment, Marilyn. The great actresses sacrifice everything for the role. You are holding back, clinging to the glamour while the work demands rawness." His words were a masterful attack, suggesting her refusal was a professional failing and a sign of weakness. Marilyn felt the wave of loneliness wash over her. No one in that room saw the resolute girl who made the promise. They saw only the property, the profit margin, and a woman who dared to say no. She realized this was not a negotiation. It was an execution of power. She had to stand on the one thing they couldn't control, her own will. She let a moment of tense silence fill the overly ornate room, the tick of the wall clock becoming oppressively loud. She finally spoke, her voice still quiet, but carrying the weight of total finality. "I am giving you my commitment, Mr. Warner. I will do 20 takes of the scene as written in the silk robe. I will give you genuine despair, emotional pain, and I will deliver an unforgettable performance. But I will not shoot that specific version of the scene. I will not compromise my personal dignity for a clause. You may sue me, you may remove me from the film, you may fire me, but my answer, gentlemen, is final." She turned, walking toward the door without another word, her exit a declaration of independence. She had made her stand, staking her entire career on a principle, but the cruel sound of the Hollywood gossip machine starting to churn was already echoing down the hallway. The morning papers arrived at Marilyn's Brentwood home like poison arrows, each headline laced with venom and speculation, turning her principled stand into a spectacular, career-harming scandal. "Monroe demands overhaul on set. Is she too fragile to finish?" screamed one tabloid, while another, more cruelly, accused her of being a prudish liability whose ego was destroying a major motion picture. This was the dark reality of Hollywood, a place that adored the myth but was quick to reject the woman, especially when she dared to set her own boundaries. The backlash was immediate and brutal. The studio, eager to protect the film's financial viability, unleashed a vicious whisper campaign. Journalists fed carefully crafted inside sources by the studio's PR machine, reported that Marilyn was suffering from severe professional burnout, that her emotional instability was causing costly delays, and that her refusal was simply a diva tantrum. The public, who had loved the idea of a beautiful, pliable blonde, were now being handed a new, far less appealing narrative, that Marilyn was unreliable, difficult, and a fraud who was obstructing true art. For 3 agonizing days, Marilyn retreated into a solitude that felt less like peace and more like a besieged fortress, refusing calls and letting the outside machine grind away at her reputation. The cruelty of the world had always wounded Norma Jeane far deeper than it ever touched Marilyn Monroe. When she called a celebrated actress friend for support, the friend's crisp recorded message offering thoughts and prayers felt colder and more cutting than any sensational headline, confirming the professional isolation that settled around her like a shroud. She walked the halls of her beautiful home, clutching the script pages, the words blurring as the ache of betrayal settled in her chest. She remembered the faces of the crew on the soundstage, the ones who had instantly looked away when Lang issued his ultimatum. They were afraid too. This realization that her fight had cost her the temporary goodwill of her colleagues deepened her sense of isolation. She was fighting not just Lang, but the entire culture of fear that ran Hollywood, where the powerful constantly demanded that the powerless sacrifice their personal well-being for the greater financial good. But amidst the isolation, a fierce protective core began to harden inside her. They wanted her to break down? No. She would endure the public hatred because her dignity was worth more than their praise. Her mind was already moving past the pain, focusing on the next step, the counter-move. She needed a weapon against their lies, something concrete to expose Lang's true motive, and she knew the only place to find it was deep within the shadows of the soundstage. She was desperately scanning the faces of those who had witnessed the confrontation, searching for one pair of eyes that had not looked away. The hour was late, the Brentwood house utterly silent except for the distant, persistent chime of a grandfather clock in the hall. Marilyn was trying to anchor her mind against the relentless press attacks when she heard a faint scratching sound at her front door. She paused, her heart giving a nervous flutter, convinced it was another relentless reporter or paparazzo. Instead, lying flat on the expensive imported stone under her door was an ordinary, folded piece of thick brown paper sealed with a simple dab of wax, the humble mark of a steady, honest hand. Curiosity overriding caution, she picked up the package. It felt small, humble, and utterly out of place amid the glamorous chaos of her life. She broke the seal and unfolded the paper. Inside was a single page of handwritten text, the handwriting small and neat, the lines perfectly parallel, the ink the muted blue of a steady, working hand. The note was unsigned, but the title scrawled at the top read simply, "From your silent ally." Marilyn's hands trembled slightly as she read the words. The note didn't offer sympathy, it offered facts, the kind that could dismantle an empire. It explained that Lang's demand had nothing to do with artistic necessity and everything to do with a private, vicious wager. Lang, the note revealed, had been boasting to a rival director at a private Hollywood dinner that he could publicly humiliate Marilyn Monroe and force her to comply with any demand, all for the pathetic, disgusting sum of a $1,000 bet, treating her dignity as poker chips. The nude scene was not a creative choice. It was a demonstration of absolute power over a star. The shock of the revelation was immediate, replacing Marilyn's wounded feeling with a cold, clear fury that burned away her shame. The pain of the public scandal vanished, replaced by the righteous anger that this had all been a game, a cruel spectacle arranged to satisfy a man's petty, pathetic ego. The author of the note, who only identified herself as a longtime member of the wardrobe department, wrote that she had heard the conversation through a partially open door. She ended the note with a simple plea: "Do not let him win this small, disgusting war. Your dignity is worth more than their whole studio." Marilyn stood up, the humble paper rustling in her clenched hand. The shame she had felt over the last 3 days evaporated like morning mist. She had been called a liar, a prima donna, and a professional obstacle. But now she held the undeniable truth. She was the target of a vicious, coordinated attempt to violate her deepest principles. Her fight wasn't against artistic vision. It was against corruption disguised as creativity. The loneliness she had felt moments ago was lifted, replaced by the warmth of knowing that one honest heart on the soundstage had seen the truth and acted with courage. The fight was no longer personal. It was a battle for principle. The time for hiding was over. She carefully folded the note and tucked it securely into the pocket of her dressing gown. The next morning, she would return to the studio, not as a defiant star, but as a woman armed with the secret truth that would turn the director's humiliation back upon himself. The soundstage on the day of the planned scene felt less like a movie set and more like a coliseum ready for a showdown. The atmosphere was thick, vibrating with the suppressed excitement of a crew who knew a volcano was about to erupt. Otto Lang, oblivious in his self-importance, was in full control, his voice booming as he ensured the lights perfectly highlighted the patch of floor where Marilyn was meant to fall in her state of demanded vulnerability. He waited, savoring the moment of absolute psychological dominance he was about to exert over his star. The scheduled time came and went. The cameras were rolling, but the stage remained conspicuously empty. Lang's face darkened with rage. He was ready to explode when the large double doors to the soundstage swung open with a quiet, deliberate efficiency that stopped every breath in the room. Marilyn did not sweep in grandly. She entered as an elegant statement of quiet, controlled power. She was not in costume. She wore a perfectly tailored, cream-colored suit, an outfit that spoke of business, not glamour. She walked with a quiet, controlled pace directly past the cameras, carrying only the small, folded brown paper. Lang started toward her, fury contorting his face. "What is the meaning of this, Marilyn? We are rolling. You are in breach of contract. Where is your wardrobe?" Marilyn stopped 10 feet from him, standing perfectly straight under the hottest spotlight. "We are not rolling, Otto," she said, her voice softer, but infinitely more commanding, a calm stream overriding a frantic torrent. "And this is not about my wardrobe. It's about your principles." She turned her gaze past Lang, locating Mr. Warner, the studio head. "Mr. Warner," she called out, her voice now carrying across the wide, cavernous space. "I demand an immediate cessation of filming and a private meeting now." Warner reluctantly strode onto the set. Lang tried to intervene, sputtering about contracts and costs, but Marilyn cut across him with devastating focus. "This is not about an artistic disagreement, Mr. Warner. This is about manipulation and fraud." As the entire crew watched in breathless silence, Marilyn reached into her pocket and pulled out the note. She didn't hand it to Warner. She read it aloud, her voice clear and measured. She read the damning description of Lang's boast at the dinner, the calculated setup of the scene, and the revelation of the $1,000 bet. As the terrible words filled the soundstage, Otto Lang's face transformed from fury to a ghastly ashen shade of panic. The entire context of the conflict shifted instantly. It was about Lang's professional betrayal. Mr. Warner realized the horrifying scope of the scandal. A star fighting for dignity was a temporary headache. A director exposing the studio to public disgrace over a petty, degrading wager was grounds for immediate removal. Lang was trapped, exposed by a silent heart who refused to let his cruelty succeed. The three of them, Marilyn, Lang, and Mr. Warner, retreated into the quiet gloom of the costume storage room, a space filled with discarded velvet and chiffon. But the confrontation that unfolded was the most unscripted and gripping performance of Marilyn's career. Lang, knowing the game was up, tried desperately to bluster, denying the note, calling it a fabrication, his voice rising in panicked desperation until it cracked and failed completely. "This is insane, Warner. This is the word of some disgruntled lackey against a major director." She is trying to defraud the studio. Lang was sweating profusely, his face shiny with fear and denial. Mr. Warner, already calculating the irreversible public relations damage, was beyond listening. Marilyn spoke then, and her voice was a revelation, the pure, articulate power of a woman who had finally found the perfect words to articulate her deepest truth. She didn't shout. She lectured with chilling authority. It isn't about the word of a lackey, Otto. It is about the intent. You didn't demand vulnerability. You demanded humiliation. You said you wanted to unearth the truth of performance, but your truth is that you see women as objects to be broken, to be used to satisfy your petty male pride. She moved closer to Lang, her elegant suit contrasting sharply with his disheveled panic. You wanted to teach me a lesson? Then let me teach you one. I am not the scene. My commitment is to genuine emotional pain, but that performance must come from me, from my soul, which is mine to protect. The moment you tried to use my vulnerability for your gamble, you turned art into filth. Her words hit him like physical blows. She then addressed Mr. Warner, switching her appeal from moral outrage to professional reality. I offered you honesty and a performance worth millions. Otto Lang offered you a crippling lawsuit and proof that your studio treats its most valuable assets as playthings. His motivation proves that my refusal was a necessary act of self-preservation. Warner saw the picture clearly. Lang was a catastrophe. Without a moment of hesitation, Warner pointed a trembling finger at Lang. Lang tried one last desperate grab for his dignity, but his hands were shaking so badly that his tailored jacket seemed to suddenly hang loose. His shoulders slumped as his ego visibly shattered before them. You're finished, Otto. Clear your locker and leave the lot immediately. We will contact your lawyers. Lang was escorted out, defeated by a security guard, unable to utter another protest. Marilyn watched him go, feeling a deep, weary sense of peace, having won the battle for her dignity. She was still Marilyn, the luminous star, but she was also Norma Jeane, the young woman who had kept her promise. But even as the director was being ushered off the lot, the cold reality of Hollywood reminded her that every principle came with a cost. Mr. Warner was already planning the next phase, the painful fallout and the management of her inevitable professional punishment. The silence that fell after Lang's humiliating removal was one of profound, chilly calculation. Mr. Warner's relief was quickly replaced by a cold-eyed determination to protect the studio's image. He was not about to let Marilyn Monroe emerge from this ordeal looking like a triumphant heroine, setting a dangerous precedent for every other star under contract. He met Marilyn later that day. Lang is gone. We will issue a press release stating he was removed due to erratic behavior. You, my dear, will be taking an immediate leave of absence, effective immediately. Marilyn felt the trap closing. A leave of absence? I'm ready to return to work. Warner shook his head, his eyes devoid of warmth. The public needs a narrative, Marilyn. They need to see that the turmoil affected you. Our statement will say you have suffered extreme emotional exhaustion due to the filming environment and require immediate rest. This was the price of principle, losing the public battle for the truth. She had defended her dignity, but the studio was still demanding she pay the emotional tax by accepting the narrative that she was fragile, easily overwhelmed, and unstable. It was a subtle, unofficial blacklist, a temporary removal disguised as compassion. No new offers would come in, not until the public furor faded completely. The weeks that followed were filled with an aching quiet. Marilyn was a woman built for work, and the bright energy of performance and the forced inactivity was draining. Her silence felt like a betrayal of her own victory. Every day without work was a slow, crushing validation of the studio's narrative that she was a liability, prone to instability. She spent days wandering her beautiful home reading the note. The headlines cooled, replaced by the next celebrity scandal, but the studio's silence was deafening. She felt the profound unfairness of it. She had taken the moral high ground, yet she was isolated and framed as the problem. She sat on her patio one evening, the pink sunset indifferent to her pain. She had survived the immediate blow, but the victory felt hollow in the face of this quiet professional banishment. Her integrity was safe, but her future felt terrifyingly uncertain. She knew she had done the right thing, but she desperately needed a sign, a confirmation from the outside world that her dignity had been truly seen. Months after the scandal faded, Marilyn was in New York, deliberately far from the poisonous quiet of Hollywood, trying to focus on acting classes and intellectual renewal, when an utterly ordinary brown package arrived at her apartment. It was addressed in the same neat, unassuming handwriting as the pivotal note she still kept locked away, immediately signaling its importance. She opened the package with a rush of nervous anticipation. Inside was a creation of heartbreaking simplicity. A silk slip, meticulously hand-stitched, the color of moonlight and innocence. This garment, humble and crafted with tireless love, stood in stark, pure contrast to the cold, impersonal, and expensive couture that usually defined her public life, a true offering of human warmth. Tucked into one of the delicate seams was a small, square card. Marilyn unfolded it, her eyes misting as she recognized the familiar, neat penmanship. The message was the culmination of her fight, a 12-word note that shattered her composure and brought the rush of tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed during the confrontation. Your courage is the only garment you ever truly needed, Marilyn. That was the moment the public win gave way to the private, profound victory. It was a small, humble confirmation from a woman who worked in the shadows. Eleanor had seen Norma Jeane's bravery and affirmed that her dignity was the most beautiful, unassailable thing she possessed. The words spoke directly to her past trauma, acknowledging that she had finally fulfilled the vow she made in her youth to never be forced to sell her soul. Marilyn collapsed onto the sofa, clutching the silk and the card, weeping tears of pure catharsis. She realized that while Hollywood might punish her, the human heart, the real soul of the world, recognized her integrity. She wasn't just Marilyn the star, she was the woman of principle, and someone knew it. She had risked everything to protect her self-respect, and this gift proved the risk was worth the reward. It was a tangible, silent declaration that she was seen, not as an object, but as a warrior. She carefully folded the note and laid it gently inside the silk slip. This gift, more precious than any diamond necklace or Oscar, would be her secret, personal reminder of the day she refused to break. The hollow ache in her chest was gone, replaced by the warmth of knowing she had an ally. It was a powerful, quiet victory, a testament that fame meant nothing if one did not have the respect of one's own heart. The battle over the nude scene ended in the quiet, profound shift in her character that would define her career's trajectory, transforming her from a vulnerable pawn into a formidable player. It taught her that the only way to truly survive Hollywood was to stop fighting the machine and start owning the gears, securing her fate with her own two hands. When Marilyn returned to the set, she was a different woman. She didn't rage, she negotiated with cold, clear authority. Her rebellion became her silent, untouchable shield. The studio, terrified of creating a second scandal, allowed her to leverage her integrity into unprecedented creative freedom. This understanding led directly to her revolutionary decision to break away from the traditional studio contract and form her own production company, Marilyn Monroe Productions. The creation of her own company was the ultimate act of self-defense, a tangible manifestation of her vow. She realized that ownership was the only true antidote to exploitation. She kept the silk slip and the 12-word note in a locked box. They were a constant, tangible reminder that the fight for self-respect was the most important one she would ever wage. They reminded her that the highest compliment she ever received wasn't for her acting or her beauty, but for her courage. Marilyn Monroe's legacy is the secret, ferocious battle she waged for the right to be seen as a person. The rebellion was the definitive private moment when Norma Jeane fulfilled her teenage vow and officially became Marilyn Monroe, the producer and businesswoman, forever controlling the narrative. The girl who started with nothing risked everything to ensure that her dignity was always the last thing she put on and the last thing she took off. If this story of quiet courage reminded you that true strength is found in protecting your dignity, please hit the like button and subscribe. Don't miss another story that pulls back the curtain on the real people behind the legends.